Hello everyone, welcome again to LIS2360 Web App Development with me, Muhammad Prabu Wibowo.
In this video tutorial, we will discuss about CSS or Cascading Style Sheet. The main function of CSS is to overhaul the design of the web page. So in the previous lessons, lesson 4 about HTML, we learned about script and style tag. So CSS is basically style tag, but we can apply a lot of styles to the HTML page. And we will learn about script tag in next lesson, which is about JavaScript, but now we will focus on the style tag for CSS. So how to write CSS code? So CSS code works on selectors. So selectors is like how we select an element on the HTML page so that they can be styled. So first you need to do is you need to select the element. You can select a lot of things in the CSS. For example, you can select tag, you can select ID, you can select class. We will practice in this video tutorial. This example, I'm showing you the how to type CSS code. We have to select the element first. For example, in the left code, I'm using h1 or heading 1. In the next code, in the next piece of code, I'm defining declaration of property and then value. For example, I'm defining the color to be blue and then font size. So how does CSS work? When a browser displays the document, it must combine the content and style information. So the browser converts HTML and CSS into a DOM or document object model. The DOM represents the document in the computer's memory. It combines the document's content with its style. So, for example, I have HTML. It will load the HTML and parse the HTML, and then it will detect if the HTML has CSS. It will load if it has, and then it will parse the CSS and then creates DOM tree and showing the display to the web browser. So DOM is like a tree structure, and each element, attribute, and piece of text in the markup language become a node. So every element, attribute, piece of text in the markup language becomes DOM node, and the nodes defined by the relationship to other DOM nodes. So for example, in my HTML, I have body tag. It becomes a tree itself. It becomes a tree of body, and then it has, for example, I'm using div tags, and inside the div tag I'm using h1 for header and paragraph. So it creates a DOM itself. So all of the elements become a DOM. So this is how to translate the tag into the DOM. For example, I have body tag. So this is the codes above represents the DOM document, the tree structure in the bottom here. I'm using div content, and then I have a header, paragraph, HR, and then div or nav, navigation. And the DOM has relationships. For example, it has ancestor and descendant. So body text as an ancestor, and then for example, within the div tags, I'm using UL, and for the descendant is at lower. The UL tags and the LI are the descendants of the div. And there's also relationship of parent and child. Div and UL can be, the div itself is a parent, and the UL acts as a child. Some text has sibling relationship. It is considered as sibling when an element shares same parent. So for example, I have UL. So UL, for example, I have several lists of unordered lists here. So the LI tags here are siblings. They are having siblings relationships because they are under same parent. So next we will practice. Let's open the Cloud9. So CSS has 3 types. If you need to customize one tag only, you can use inline CSS. So inline CSS acts as a similar to attribute. So we create a style attribute here. So for example, I'm defining the color to be green and then text align to the center. So when we save and then preview, yeah, so here, so it is green and centered. So this is the first way of creating a CSS file where we put it as a attribute, style attribute inside each tag. Previously, when we want to customize a tag, we can use an attribute, right? For example, paragraph tag has attribute of align, center. But the problem is with this practice is that when we have a lot of paragraphs, we have to define one by one. So for example, this one is center and then the other one is justified. The second way of creating a CSS is an embedded CSS. So embedded CSS is what we learned in previous lesson about style tag. So in this embedded CSS, style tag becomes a tag. You put it in the head, usually in the head. So for example, in here, I have a paragraph. I'm orange. Let's say I'm orange paragraph. And then in the style tag, I'm using P. The CSS has curly brackets. So P is the, as we learn, P is a selector. Selector is P, and then we declare the property, the color to be orange. So this is the second way of creating a CSS through embedded style. So every paragraph we create, it will become an orange. So for example, this is a new paragraph. When we save, we refresh, so all of the paragraphs become orange. So you can combine as well. For example, in the inline CSS, copy and paste to the embedded tag, and when you refresh, so the new paragraph will become green. So this way is the tag overrides embedded CSS. So you can always combine the way of writing a CSS file. And the third one is the external CSS. So the external CSS, as the name implies, you will create two files. So I have two files, the HTML file and then CSS. And you can create a link to the CSS file by using link tag. So in here I'm using a link tag, link to the CSS file. So it is important you have correctly stating the name of file. So here I have 03-link css.css. Whenever you change the file name, you also need to change the link tag as well. So for example, if you have the CSS file in the folder, so for example I have folder CSS, and you move the CSS file to the CSS folder. When you refresh the external CSS, so here, as you can see, there is no change because the HTML failed to find the link CSS file. So therefore, it will render the text not according to the CSS. So here since the CSS file is inside the CSS folder, you need to define CSS slash. So slash here means there's a folder. So it tells the web browser that you need to find the CSS that has the file name of 03-link css.css inside the CSS folder. So now we refresh, we save, and preview. Now it's working. So for the practice, we will try writing several CSS codes such as text decoration, text align, font size, colors, background colors, text align, and font size. You can always learn the CSS codes through several resources. So for example, text decoration, you can use text dash decoration, and you define the value, and you can click on the link that I gave. So here, this is the example of overline. This is line through, this is underline, and this is both underline and overline. In this practice, we are using embedded CSS. So as you can see, it is using style tag. You can always change the font family. So for example, I'm using font family here. The reasons why there are a lot of typeface here is because when font is failed to load, it will move to the next one. So whenever, for example, in the second paragraph, I have Arial and Helvetica. So whenever I cannot load the Arial, it will move on to the next one, and then we move to the sans serif. And you can use colors. So for example, H1, I'm defining the color to be 00FF00. It's using hex code for the color. So for example, if I move, it defines the first two digits is like red, and then the third and fourth is green, and fifth and sixth is blue. So a red, green, blue. So for example, I'm using blue here. So you can always use hex code generator, hex code color generator. So I have several examples in the slides that I uploaded to Canvas. So the first example, I'm using external CSS here. So if, for example, in the HTML, I have H1, this is paragraph, this is second paragraph. And then in the CSS, so don't forget to always create a link. So here I'm using a link tag, link to the style1.css. So in the CSS file, I select H1 tag to have a color of blue, and then background color yellow, and border 1 pixel to have a solid black color, and I have paragraph to have a color of red. So this is the results. So the second example is I'm using a list, unordered list. So Florida cities, for example, I'm having a H1 Florida cities, and paragraph here is a list of a few cities in the Florida, and then I have unordered list. And in the CSS, and don't forget to always link to the CSS. So in the link tag, I'm having a link to the style2.css, and in the styles to CSS, I declare H1 to have a color of red, paragraph to have color of blue, and then list, another list to have color of green. So this is the results. The example of 3, I added I created h1, h2, so h1 again. So whenever you add the new h1, since in the style CSS since in the h1 CSS selector I'm declaring to have a color of blue and then the text align center. So every h1 that I have will translate into a blue color with center aligned. And in the fourth, this is an example of using CSS in the table. So I link the HTML file to style for the CSS, and then I'm selecting the table in the CSS and declare them to have a background color of yellow. So this is the results. And the example 5, I'm using class. When you are using class, you need to use dots. So here class is message, and in the CSS you need to use class selector by having dot message. So in this new example, I have a paragraph that has an ID of paragraph 1, and then this second paragraph has class of paragraph 2. And this is the new paragraph, and purple, this is the new paragraph. So I need to define the ID and class in the CSS. So how to define an ID and class? So remember, an ID is an attribute to all text. So we can giving an ID to all the HTML text. So for example, I created an ID for paragraph here. The ID is paragraph 1. So when we are creating an ID and you want to customize it in the CSS, you need to use hashtag. So hashtag is for ID. So paragraph 1 is revert to ID of p tag of paragraph 1. So I'm using color green. And then paragraph 2, I'm using class. I'm using dot. So when I save it, and I save it in here as well. So when I refresh it, so here, so the first paragraph I'm using ID, it will make the paragraph having a green color, and then the second paragraph I'm using class, so the color will be blue as defined in the CSS. So this is paragraph 1, paragraph 2, and then all the other paragraph will become purple. So when I create a new paragraph, when I save it and review, so another paragraph will become a purple. And for example, I want to create another class paragraph. So p class paragraph 3. So I'm creating a new class. So remember, class is using dot. So we need to create a new selector. Since I'm using class, so it should be dot 3. And don't forget the curly brackets. Color. Yeah. I save it. Save and refresh. So this is the third paragraph. So the third paragraph will have cyan color. And don't forget to define the color you can always use like blue or black or red, but you can always use hex color code. So you can use W3 Schools color picker. Here it will let you define the color code, hex code. So for the homework, lesson 5 lab activity, remember when you want to do the lab activity or any activity in Zybooks, you need to click on the link from Canvas. So for module 5, so for lessons 5, for lab activity, you need to click from the Canvas. So for lab activity, you will be using an embedded style, embedded CSS. So it is already inside the HTML, so you need to download the rate.html, save it to your desktop. If you are using Komodo, you can right click, use Komodo. If you are using Sublime, you can also use right click, open with Sublime. If you are using AWS Cloud9, you need to upload the RAID file to the Cloud9. So upload local file. So this is the lab file. So your solution will be right here. So this is the type of embedded CSS because it's using style tag and it is inside the HTML file. So you need to read the instruction carefully. So the first instruction requires you to make an element selector, to make a label, an inline block element with 120 pixel width. So since selector is to make a label, so go back to AWS. Here we can delete this. It's a label. Don't forget the curly brackets. When you are using AWS Cloud9, it will create the automatic closing tag. Label to be an inline block with 120 pixel width. So we need to create decoration, display, and when we are using HTML, it uses equal sign, but for CSS, don't forget we are using colon, and then without any apostrophes, inline block. And then we need to create width of 120 pixel. And then save. So this is for the instruction, the first instruction. If you want to submit, you want to check the results, you need to save it first and then download. You can always right click on it and then click download. Save. And then after I edit the first instruction, I can always submit it to check the results. So here I got the other I got the first instruction correct, so I get 2 out of 2. So make sure you do all of the instruction to get a perfect score. So that's all from me about the tutorial on CSS. I hope you do good on the assignment of the CSS lesson. If you have any questions or issue, don't forget to reach out to me or to our TA. And thank you very much for watching. See you again in the next tutorial.